Dan, your answer?
I appreciate that question. There are a couple answers from my perspective. One is to make reference to our predecessor, Paul Escoco, who is retiring, is a Republican and has gotten quite a lot of things done for our district. Going around knocking on doors, I have yet to hear a single person complain about Paul. He's done a fantastic job. A little bit more nuts and bolts answer to your question. You're right. It's a seniority-based entity, and people have to claw and scrape and pay homage to the leadership to gain seniority, to gain prominent positions on influential committees. They have to do that if they're a member of the supermajority. Right now we have 160 members in our House. 141 of them are members of the same party, my opponent's party. One of the few benefits of running for office and winning in Massachusetts as a Republican right now is that by rule there have to be 2 members of the minority on every committee. So a Republican freshman legislator is immediately on very influential committees, and that's where most legislative work is done, at the committee level. I appreciate my opponent's view of how the legislative process works. I know how the legislative process works in Massachusetts. I've been through it in all of its ugly sausage-making in glory. The battle over Melanie's Law was something unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I'll write a book someday about it. The things I saw going on that floor, there wasn't a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of in-session, arm-twisting, out-of-session, behind closed doors, people watching the chair to see how he was going to vote and then voting that way. It's an ugly, ugly system right now. And a lot of it, my opponent just said it's a public process. Unfortunately, it's supposed to be a public process, but right now on Beacon Hill, too much of it is not a public process, including, by the way, our budget debate this year, which was done by rule, passed by the House, behind closed doors. We need to send more people to Beacon Hill who are going to fight that system and who can fight that system, because a member of the supermajority, if they fight that system, they end up on a nothing committee for the rest of their career with a broom closet for an office. And that's just the way it works up there.
All right, we're going to take a break right now, and from Jim and I asking questions, and this is the point in this debate where each of you can then ask each other a question, and we will start with Dan.
Sure. I made reference to this a little bit earlier. Carolyn, you said last time you were in this room that tolls are good for a number of reasons. And then you mentioned that they have environmental benefits. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a Mass Pike driver who can come up with one reason that tolls are good, but what are some of the other reasons that, in your mind, tolls are a good thing?
I think that encouraging public transportation, or let's put it this way, taking the tolls down, in my view, would discourage the use of public transportation and would add additional traffic on the roadways, which for those people who continue to ride the Pike is not a benefit. So I think from a traffic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and a air quality standpoint, I think tolls are not a bad thing. And I would look to, to Massachusetts to sort of lead the way and actually follow a few other states, in honesty, who have implemented new toll technology that allows traffic to speed through while allowing toll payers to pay the tolls and do it in a fair way.
Okay, Carolyn, it's your turn to ask Dan a question.
Sure. I have said all along that I believe that the job of state representative is a very important job, and getting even more so, frankly, with the challenges that we're facing and the impacts that we've had on our local communities. Dan has made it clear that he intends to continue his law practice if he's elected. And in my view, the starting salary for state representative is $58,000 a year, which for many people in this district is, in fact, a full-time salary. I would like to hear from Dan why he does not believe that at this juncture our district needs full-time representation to address the issues that we're facing.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. The first thing I do, again, is point to our predecessor. Paul Escoco has maintained his legal practice throughout his 8 years in the House. As I said, again, I have yet to meet someone who has said Paul was unresponsive, said Paul missed opportunities. Paul has never missed a vote. I spent over 2 years in our State House. I know what the legislature does. I can tell you this. the job of a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives bears little to no resemblance to what people operating in the broader economy would tend to think of as a full-time job. I'll tell you this as well. There are a lot of problems at the State House. Lack of full-time legislators looking for ways to spend our money is not among those problems. I think there's a real value, to get a little bit dramatic about it now, going back to our founding, to the notion of a citizen legislator. Someone who continues to operate in the broader economy and does not become detached from it, who doesn't think that the sun rises and sets on our State House, and doesn't get an inflated sense of self-importance and start treating the taxpayers' money as though it's their own. And you know, we have too many professional legislators who have been in office for decades upon decades and will be there until they leave this earth. We need more, not fewer, legislators who operate in the economy, who can pledge, as I do, and I will, to be, as Paul was, a responsive, responsible legislator who will return phone calls, who will meet with anyone, anywhere, at any time. And that is more than enough to do the job as I know the job to be.
Okay. We will now turn to a sort of a second set of questions with Jim Kleinkoff, starting with asking the question for Dan.
All right, we're going to start with Dan, and I'm going a little out of order here because the first question you pretty much already talked about. As town officials and school officials here in Holliston know, the open meeting and the open record laws are things that, democratic principles that I take real seriously. And the open meeting law is something that the legislature passed, and cities and towns are subject to that open meeting law without question, but the legislature has exempted itself from that law. Would you, either of you, work to change that situation if you were elected?
Jim, I would, and that has been central to my campaign from the very beginning. The very week, or maybe the week after, that I learned that Paul wasn't running for re-election, and we talked about me running for the office, we got into budget negotiations in the House, and they literally, I don't want to get too much into legislativese here, but before debate begins on any big bill, they pass a rule to govern the debate. And it says how many amendments there will be, how long debate will be, et cetera. And in this rule, they put a provision saying debate on the budget will take place in caucus chambers. And that means very literally behind closed doors. No press, no public. And when asked to justify that, the chairman of the House Rules Committee said, the members like it that way. They line up before the gentleman from Ways and Means and tell him their programs. And what happened there was they added $220 million to a budget that was already projected to be over $1 billion in deficit. Yes, absolutely, that is a top priority for me. And it's not just changing the rule, it's changing the practice and speaking up against the practice. Quite frankly, I think legislators from both parties are at fault here for not coming out of that back room and going to the first reporter to tell that reporter exactly what happened in that room. Because that is, we're the oldest functioning democracy in the world in Massachusetts, and that is not democracy. The open meetings law should apply to the legislature just as it applies to every other body of government. Absolutely, and I will fight to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree with Dan on this one. I think the open meeting law is something that I've operated under for the last 8 years working in local government. I think it can be challenging, making difficult decisions in an open meeting format, but you know what, that results in better decisions as far as I'm concerned. So open meeting law across, government-wide, I think would be a very good thing and would develop a greater trust, quite honestly, between the voters and those that represent them up on Beacon Hill.